Welcome back everyone. Today, I would like to go over these stools I built. Not only are they incredibly sturdy and comfortable, but also look great. The best part is that I created them using basic tools and simple methods, without the need for complicated joinery techniques like lap joints or mortise and tenon. I wanted to demonstrate that you can produce impressive projects even if you are just starting out with minimal tools. These stools appear seamless, almost like a single piece, and the upholstery not only makes them look great, but makes them really comfortable. It was a really fun way to make them. I'll walk you through the process I used. I hope you enjoy it, and as always, please feel free to leave your comments and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. For this project, I used simple 2x4s. They're simple to get and easy to work with. I started by cutting the legs. You can look up different stool sizes. They range from 20 to 29 inches. Just make sure you make your legs the same length, or they'll end up being wobbly. A stop block really helps with that. I then cut off the edges of the 2x4s. You don't have to cut off the round edges, but it will give you a cleaner look in the end. Most basic table saws will be able to handle this. Then cut them down the middle. A 2x4 is actually only 3.5 inches wide, so if you cut them to just over 1.5 inches, that will give you a good sized leg for thickness and width. This way you can run both pieces through and end up with exact same size pieces, whether you're making one stool or 20. For this project, I decided to make 2 stools at once, but be sure to run all your legs through and make them the same width, or you'll end up with something that looks uneven and wobbly. This will also help while putting together the next part, because if you have uneven legs, then your brace pieces will all have to be different sizes as well. Next, I cut the joint pieces to 10 inches long. These are the pieces that hold the stool together, so try to cut them as close to each other as possible. A stop block helps with this. Once you have your joint pieces cut to length, you can use the exact same method and measurements to cut them as you did your legs. This will give everything a nice and even look throughout the stool. I always like to keep these thin off-cut pieces. They make great paint stir sticks. Now that you have your legs and joints cut, you can start putting them together. I measured up roughly 6 inches from the bottom and started to glue and screw them together. This is where lap joints or mortise and tenon joints come in handy, but simple screws and glue will work great. Just don't forget to use glue on your pieces, or your pieces will move when you sit, and it's a really easy part to forget. But gluing will keep everything in place and will keep them from turning on you when you sit. When you screw your pieces together, be sure to drive the screw in deep enough into the leg that it leaves a hole to be plugged later, but not so deep that it weakens the leg. Be sure to take your time and measure where your joint pieces go, but don't worry if your joints themselves don't line up 100%. We're going to fix that as well, but do try to keep them as close as you can. I decided to go with this cross piece look instead of having a joint piece on every corner. It saved on a little bit of wood, and it actually came out looking a little more stylish than it would have if I just used pieces on every corner. It was a little more annoying to put together, but it did come out looking great in the end. All you have to do is just make sure you measure in the middle of both your pieces, and you can get this really great look. However, if you are more comfortable just doing a piece on every corner, it'll only take a few extra pieces of wood. So once you have everything put together, do yourself a little bit of a favor and make sure to wipe off as much of the excess glue as you can. Just take a paper towel or a rag and get as much of it. If you do it now while it's wet, it'll be a lot easier. Otherwise, you'll have to sand it off later when it's dry, and since it'll be in the corners, it'll be much more difficult. Moving on to the seat, I took some 2x4, measured and cut them to about 15 inches long. You need to make it overlap the top of the stool, but you can decide if you want a rectangle or a square seat. I went with a rectangle. Once you have the length of them ready, you can cut these down to 1 inch thickness. It will be thick enough and strong enough, and you'll be able to get more pieces out of one 2x4. If you want to make them thicker, you can, but it will just add to the weight of the finished stool, and 1 inch pieces will be plenty strong. I was able to cut 14 pieces for each stool after trimming down the excess. That would give me a 13.5 by a 14.5 inch seat. So it was time to glue and clamp them up. I use this biscuit joiner I have, but this is completely unnecessary. You can just glue up the edges and clamp them up, and the glue will be plenty strong enough to hold them together. Biscuits are for lining up wood, not for holding them together. But since these aren't very big, gluing up the edges will work great. In fact, doing this added some unnecessary time, and it would have gone quicker if I just glued them up, and I would have ended up with the same result. Although, when it comes time to sand after, the more lined up edges do make it a little easier, but you'll be just fine without biscuits in the end. Now, I'm going to get some pushback on this part, because I said that you can make these with very basic tools. I've seen some table saws go as low as $80. But clamps are a tough one for most beginners. They can be hard to store, and most importantly, they can be very, very expensive. But these are bar clamps. You can buy the actual clamp part and either buy or make the bar parts in whatever size you want at a later time. I use these ones all the time, and they didn't cost me very much. But I'm going to link one of my older videos where I used car straps to make a glue up. It's not perfect, but it does work really well. Just remember to wipe off as much glue as you can. That will make it easier for sanding after. I decided to add joint pieces to the top of the stools where the seat attaches. I realized that although you were going to have to cut some more pieces, in the end, attaching the seat to these parts rather than the legs was going to be a much easier and much more practical way of doing it. These pieces are the exact same measurements as your other joint pieces, so you can make them without having to make new measurements. It did use up a little more wood. All in all, 2 of these stools only used up about 3 2x4s and only cost about $6 each in wood. That's pretty good. All you have to do is glue and screw them to the top of the stool legs, and this will also make it much more sturdier in the end. Just a quick reminder that you're going to want to plunge your screw into the wood as deep as you can without damaging your wood. This will make it a lot easier to plug your holes because you'll have lots of room to work with. And I'm going to show you a great way to do that really soon. Now that the seats are dry, we can take them out of the clamps and get ready to clean them up. 2 of the edges will be pretty rough. You can take them to the table saw and just cut one of the rough, jagged edges. Once you have a clean side, you can set up your fence and then cut the other side to square it up. But if you're not really in love with the one side you cut first, you can rerun that side through the fence, and that should give you a more square edge on both sides. But a lot of table saws have these sliders that come with them, even some of the most basic ones. They're really great. You just slide them into the track and you can set up your piece and slide it straight through and get yourself a nice clean edge. It really helps. You can even change the angle of it, but they're kind of best for just using them straight if you're just starting out on table saws. These sides probably won't come out as perfect as you'd like them to be, but don't worry, we still have a lot of sanding left to do, so you can really make it look really great after that. When it comes to sanding, your best bet is to start off with the lowest sandpaper you can find, which is usually about a 40 grit. That will take off the glue and make the seat pretty flat, but it will make your project really rough to the touch. So you will need to go up in sandpaper smoothness, but your final grit preference will be up to you. This is a little hand planer. You can use it to clean up some of the glue and misaligned joints, but it's not a big deal if you don't have one. It will just need a couple more passes with a hand sander. However, don't forget to run your hand sander over the edges. This will give it a nice round over finish and will make it so you won't get any splinters. You can use a router if you have one, but a sander will do just fine in the end. Now it's time to clean up your legs. This is where you can flatten out any misaligned joints, which will help make it look like one solid piece of wood. This part might be a little annoying and time consuming. You probably won't be able to get into every corner, but it will very much be worth it in the end. Just take your time and try to smooth out as much as you can. You'll be happy you did in the end. Now you can start to put it all together. After you play around with it to see how you want the seat to sit on the legs, give it a test before you screw it all together. I suggest you try it out first. So far, this held up great. It held me up no problem, and I'm pushing roughly 200 pounds. Well, 205 after National Donut Day. But nonetheless, it held up great. Now comes the time for one of the best finishing touches. These screw holes are really unsightly and would normally be filled with some kind of wood filler or sawdust glue mixture. And to be honest, I hate using that stuff. It doesn't do a great job filling these kinds of holes. I'm guessing you used these very common construction screws. They leave a hole that fits a medium-sized dowel perfectly. These dowels are not only easy to find, they're really inexpensive too. So this next part is so easy, it will really take your project to the next level. All you have to do is fill each hole with a small drop of glue. Then take your dowel and tap it lightly with a hammer. Once you've done that, you can take a hacksaw or a pole saw like I have here and cut off the tip. If you don't have a hacksaw or any kind of handsaw, that's no problem. You can actually just give the dowel a quick score with a box knife or any kind of knife and snap off the top. Then smooth out the rest with your hand sander. Then just repeat that for every screw hole you have. It makes the wood smooth, but also leaves a small dot that actually gives it a bit of character as well. However, if you're not in love with that look, you can give it a paint job and you'll never even know it's ever there. Now here are a couple of great looking stools, not to mention really strong and sturdy, all for only $6 a stool. That's amazing. If you like the final result here, all you would need to do is put a finish on them and then put them to use and enjoy. But let's see what these look like with a paint job on them. Now, I'm using my paint sprayer because I didn't think I was going to paint these and didn't have any paint stuff on hand other than my sprayer. But I'll tell you, a great place to find paint stuff, especially for these fun weekend projects, is the dollar store. They surprisingly have everything you need for much cheaper than any paint or box store. I had some latex paint left over from another project and decided to use it up. But latex paint, much like other paints, need a primer under it. So I gave these a quick light coat of primer before moving on to the latex paint. Now that I got a coat of primer on there, I started with the latex paint. I don't normally use latex paint, but I had it left over from a project someone else asked me to do. I don't like using it because to get a good finish it requires a lot of coats. So just take it slow and don't overdo it, or it will glob up on you. However, I personally like to use cabinet paint for things like this. I find it comes out better in the end and is a little more forgiving. Now, you may or may not know this, but it's good to use a finishing spray on furniture, like a polyurethane or lacquer of some kind. This is a water-based poly. I like to use it because it's easy to spray or brush on. You don't need too much of it, and you get a nice finish and an extra layer of protection from scratches and things like that. In the end, you'll get a nice look from it. This is the foam I used for the seat. I got it from a local foam store. It wasn't nearly as hard to find as I thought it was going to be. And this is something called batten. It's needed to protect from tearing the upholstery and exposing the foam. The person at the store walked me through how to do this and said you need the foam to overhang the wood and you'll get a nice rounded and soft edge. It makes it really hard to staple it in, so I took my time and lined up everything as much as I could. I glued the wood to the foam to keep it from moving around. I used my Instabond glue, which was a little overkill since there's an actual spray for this, but I didn't have any of that on hand. But the Instabond worked great. Once it was glued on to keep from moving around, I started to staple it on. And as you can see, I'm using just a regular stapler, no nail gun or compressor. This stapler works great and was way easier to use than I thought. I proceeded to staple it onto the wood, and the key to doing this is to make it as tight as possible. Stretch it out as hard and as tight as you possibly can. If you need to staple it in, then re-staple it in to get it even tighter, that might help. But as you get it tighter and tighter, you can start cutting off the excess. I used a white vinyl I thought was going to come out looking really cool, and I'm really glad I did because it looked great. The hardest part to doing this was the corners. It took the longest time, but as you get it as tight as you can cut away as much of the corner as possible and then tuck it into itself. So you tuck it away into itself, not to see as much of the corner as possible. This is something that's really difficult and needs practice, but I was getting better at it as I went along. One thing I learned was that it was much better to staple as close to the edge as I could, instead of stapling closer to the middle. This gave it a cleaner look, and that meant I could cut away even more of the excess. Now don't worry about using too many staples. I promise you there's no such thing. If you go to anything that's been upholstered in your house, like a chair or something, and look, I guarantee you there's a ton of staples holding it together. And that's a professional doing it. So don't worry if you think you're overdoing it. I promise you you're not. Take a look at this part right here. I used a ton of staples, but that's not a problem. They're going to be covered by the legs of the stool, which will also keep everything held down and make it even more secure. Before I went on to the next stool, I decided to finish this one up first. It was quite a bit more difficult to attach the top of an upholstered stool than a regular one. It was really easy for the legs to get misaligned. As you're trying to screw it in, be sure to take your time with the first 2 screws. Once you have them in, to keep it from moving too much on you, you can do the rest pretty easily. This is one of the reasons I said to make it easy on yourself and load up with staples, since the stapled part is going to be hidden anyway, and in the end the upholstery will be held down very well this way. I hope you enjoyed watching this. If you've ever wanted to try upholstery, I suggest you give it a try. I had a lot of fun learning about this, and I'm definitely going to try it more in the future. Once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I hope you decide to subscribe. I'll see you on the next project, and until then, keep building.